You are listening to the Gritty Podcast, where we talk about all things gritty. All right, folks, welcome to the Gritty Podcast. I'm your host, Brian Cullen. I'm joined today by Brad Hunt, and we are back to the book, Crow Killer, the Saga of Liver-Eating Johnson. I think this is the last episode of the series. If you're tuning in now, go back. I think we have 10 or something shows that are about an hour long each.
Yeah, roughly. I can't recall.
Something like that. Go back to the beginning and check them out. They're well worth the time. We've been getting a lot of positive feedback on our series. If you're listening to this podcast right now, we're most likely out hunting.
Yes.
And we are not we're not in the studio. So it's the season to be out elk hunting, moose hunting, caribou hunting.
Deer is coming up.
Deer hunting.
E-scouting time.
Yeah, it's
deer,
the fall,
everything.
man. The time of year that we all look forward to as mountain hunters.
Yes.
And Western hunters, and I'm stoked.
As much as you guys like the content, we hate being in the office. Like, I hate it.
I actually like a little of both. It's a nice balance.
It is. It's a nice balance. But about the time you get sick of being in the office, it's time to go out and you get a little reset.
Our last, where we left off last episode, Liver-Eating Johnson was in the cabin with White Eye, who had escaped, who had a white eyebrow and burn on his face. It looks like, sounds like, where he was getting attacked by Blackfeet.
Yeah,
and they ended up lighting the prairie on fire, which gets him running away from a prairie fire, and they dive into a buffalo wallow. It's about a foot deep and an acre wide. And then somehow he gets up a little too soon, and he gets hit in
buffalo chip right in the face.
Gets a burning buffalo chip right in the face, and then he has to go to a local Indian tribe that's friendly, and use their medicine men to get his eye fixed. But anyway, it leaves a scar there for a long time. White Eye is there with Del Gue, and they are in a cabin that looks like a trap, like this cabin is set up where there's no escape against the cliff wall. But what they don't know, but Jeremiah Johnson does, is that there's actually a natural tunnel out the back of the cabin, which will put them into a cistern canyon where they can escape from such a place. So he, in the middle of winter, right when the first snows are coming, the Blackfeet show up and steal his horses and his pelts and his mules, and they know that the Blackfeet are outside waiting for them, and they're trapped. So they decide what they're going to do is, Johnson decides that he's going to bake some biscuits, poison them with strychnine, and leave them for the Utes. Turns out the story as the legend goes, because Johnson never went back after he left the biscuits, doesn't really know what happens, but some other trappers went in there later and come back, and they reported that they found 29 dead Blackfeet Indians that had been waiting in ambush but ate the biscuits. So,
I was looking
story
at White Eye, and they say the Indians, after he had the white eyebrow and stuff, they said that if he was blessed, then that would protect him. So
I wonder what ignominious death he didn't die because he told the story stories later in life.
And so they were like, he's still
Del Gue.
His last son, I believe, died in 1979. Yes,
Nuts.
So, and he died in 1866.
Wow.
So
Civil War.
Yeah.
Post.
So not long after.
No. Yeah, not long after this. Huh?
Yeah, I was going to say not long after they escaped out that cabin and stuff.
So when did he tell the stories? Because it's most of the stories, a lot of the stories in this book are from White Eye as the witness.
Yeah.
Eyewitness account.
I am not sure because
he died 1866.
So no. Sorry. 1946.
Oh,
he was 1946.
I was going to say I thought he told these stories in his 80s. And stuff, and he's just a young boy in the cabin.
He died at 92.
Yeah. So later in 1956. So he's well into the 1900s. World War. He was there for World War I and II.
Yep, correct.
So can
you imagine? Those are hard times.
Well, imagine being around with Jeremiah Johnson, but then also experiencing World War II.
Yeah.
I mean, you're an old dude.
Yeah,
You've seen some
I mean,
things.
you see like what 2 years of World War II roughly. I think 1924.
Talk about a change, right? Like from Blackfeet Indians trying to kill you in a cabin
to the Germans in
to
Japan,
the whole U.S. settled and fighting world wars.
Japan flying planes and
wild.
Whew.
That's a change in history.
See, I would love to sit down with guys like that.
Yeah, and so that's where a lot of this book comes from.
Yeah.
So before we get started, I want to remind you to check out our partners over at Mountain Ops. If you like the show and you like what we do, need a little pick-me-up, Mountain Ops is a great choice. Use the code GRITTY over there, and you can get some Ignite. I like the Citrus Bliss, the pink lemonade.
Yep.
You like the sweet.
Oh, that sweet tea lemonade is money.
Anyway, we talk about it all the time. Check that out. And also they have some great merino that I really like, and workout clothing. They got a little bit of everything. I like the Blaze shots as well. They're like a 5-hour energy shot. And then use the code GRITTY over at Stealthy Nutrition. They got a lot of great products for gut health. I love their glassing pad, the rifle cover that Ryan came up with. Those are two products that every hunter will be glad they have and will use extensively. Yep. You brought my old glassing pad because you forgot yours on this hunt with my dad and I.
It sucked.
And it was an old prototype version. And but my dad was sitting there going, look, I've never used the glassing pads. I watch your movies for years now, and I think, really? You're going to pack that pad? I can't imagine. Like, I never believed in the pad.
There are so many. It's funny because you don't realize it, but there are so many uses for the glassing pad. Sitting on, storing your stuff on like you're eating dinner. As Ryan taught me, you can use it as a pretty dang good fan when you're starting a fire. Like when he's lighting a tree on fire.
Look, I'm telling you, once you have the glassing pad, you'll never go back.
Yes.
My dad used it on the trip, and he's like, oh my heavens, I get it now.
Yeah.
I know why you guys are using this constantly. He was always looking for it, always getting his hands on it. The second or third day, he was looking for his headlamp, his spoon, and his steri pin.
Orange spoon, Bryce. Orange spoon.
And his steri pin for like the third time in a row. And he's like, how do you not lose everything? And I'm like, because I put my Stealthy Hunter glassing pad right here next to my sleeping bag, and all my little knickknacks go on that. It's my don't lose your crap pad.
Or I put it back, like as soon as I'm done using my steri pen, I always just put it back in my pack so I know where it's at.
Whenever I'm carving, cutting, I have a location, which is usually my pad, that I just put stuff on until it goes back in my bag.
Well, I'll say this too, you get into obviously spring, you got wet weather, but in the fall you're getting some dew and stuff when the temperatures start cooling off. And so when you're early morning glassing and you got wet grass or wet rocks, sitting that down, like I sit the dark side down and I always have the orange side up. That way I'm like, okay, I can see it. I never forget it.
Yep.
And it's always that bottom side, like you can stay away from getting your butt all wet.
Right. And,
all the time.
If you want the orange, if you want to leverage the orange side, you don't want it to get too soiled and dirty.
Yep.
So that it stays reflective.
Yep.
You can flag your buddy left, right, up, down with the pad.
I've done that a lot.
Like when you're bow hunting, especially, we were in some spots where, like Arizona, and I'm like, you got a buddy who's trying to direct you into where the canyon you need to drop into, and you're like, is it this one or is it that? I'm lost. Everything looks flat. And we would use those pads so the glasser could find you and then go, oh, yeah. And then they can direct you left or right. They can use their pad to flag you places.
And it works well.
It's so useful across the board. You can use it, of course, sitting on it, kneeling on it, all those things. But anyway, we're going way too deep into this. But I'm telling you, the glassing pad is a very inexpensive investment, but so worth it. Dry butt, dry knees, dry everything. And, I just use it everywhere now.
Yep.
So anyway, let's get into this book. I think this is our last little bit. Let's see how this saga unfolds. Mariano and the Ute Chief. Ooh. Mariano Modena was small, but tough as an oak. Educated, he said, by priests, he spoke 13 Old World languages, could read 5 more, and to these he added the linguistics of a dozen Indian tribes. His friends managed not to regard him as a Mexican, despite his birth in Taos and his 3/4 Spanish blood and his 1/4 Indian. After all, he had been a mountain man now since the early 1830s. He had learned his trade with such giants as Sublet, Hugh Glass, and Bill Williams. He felt an unqualified, never explained hatred for all Indians. He gave homage to one man only, Liver-Eating Johnson. He hated Indians.
Yeah.
Even though he was part Indian.
Yeah, so his real name was Jesus Garcia Mariano Modeno.
It says, sometimes it seemed, if not to Johnson, at least to Delgue, that even such a friend as Mariano could be unnecessarily cruel to his foe. As example, take his treatment of Captain Jack, the Ute chief. Now, like Johnson, Mariano Modeno married a flathead girl, though their methods of winning their wives were quite unlike. Mariano bought one Mary from the French trapper who had stolen her and two other girls in a raid. Oh, that's her name.
Yeah.
Mary. Or Marie. And renamed her John. So he bought her from a trapper who had kidnapped her, and then he changed her name from Mary to John. As John, she covered the trapping trails with Mariano beside her for years, and herself killed many Indians. At last, Mariano built John a house, but at the same time set her up in business in the Big Thompson Valley of Colorado by the large log house. Built with the help of other trappers and furnished from Santa Fe and Taos, stood a dormitory fort, defended always by what wandering mountain men might be taking advantage of Mariano's hospitality. The valley of the Big Thompson was beautiful country, and years earlier Mariano had promised himself he would build there. But the site had another advantage. Here he could build a toll bridge at the ford on the main immigrant trail from Arkansas to the Pacific. Mariano's fort, which he named Namaqua, became a stage station on the overland stage route in 1862. He hired old friends from Taos to man the business, but gave overall charge to John, his Indian wife. Mariano would lead no home life himself. To him, home was a replenishing point for powder and ball, or infrequently for a home-cooked meal. Mariano was careful of his reputation for never resting, just as he cherished his fame among the trappers as one too danged small to hit. In fact, of course, Mariano slept. At least he once let Johnson and Delgue see him bed down, and in fact, his tough hide was full of Indian lead. Once General A.H. Jones, according to his son's tale in 1932, walking with Mariano, asked his permission to touch an astonishing lump in his flesh. With Mariano's grinning permission, the general did touch, or rather press the lump, and out popped the heavy caliber bullet. "That is Arapaho lead I have carried 20 years, said Mariano. "There are a lot working out of my hide lately."
So there's...
What?
Yeah.
What about lead poisoning?
Right.
Like, this stuff can't be good for you.
No. So it says the Namaqua Park is named after Mariano Modeno. Yeah. Well, sorry. His like second or third name, Mariano. Mariano Medina. Also Modena. Yep.
Mariano's appearance now in his 50s is astonishingly described in material variously published in 1890. Though the details in the many reminiscences differed, Mariano appearing in one, for example, as a Frenchman, they all clearly have the same source. Nearly 30 years ago, one of the accounts begins, when traveling in the Taos Valley of New Mexico, we chanced to camp for the night at the same watering place with a dude-looking Spaniard named Mariano Modeno. He had a squaw wife who wore a blanket and moccasins. Mariano himself wore a blanket coat which was gaily ornamented with silk. It is our good luck indeed that Mariano on this occasion was traveling with full retinue. He traveled in a dilapidated carriage with a pair of Hawken rifles in easy reach. His team of horses was guided by an Indian who rode the right wheeler and directed the leaders with a jerkline. But the writer made no pretense to have seen Mariano's home or his estate, well fixed with cattle, sheep, and horses. Delgue could have testified to the impression these could make. Rounding a bend in a trail through towering trees in what seemed primeval country, Del's mouth hung open in astonishment. Here were cleared acres in which no stump was to be seen. Here were not only fort, toll bridge, and house, but a large vegetable garden, horse corrals, a huge barn filled with feed, a stockade for oxen, an enclosure with 4 milk cows, a chicken yard in which hens scratched industriously. Quite the businessman.
Yeah, and that's it. It says like he loaned a bank or whatever somebody to start a business back in the day, like $60,000 in like 1871 or something like that, which is a lot of money.
Yeah, Mariano
especially.
Mariano buys most of the stuff, Johnson told him, from immigrants passing, but the wonder explained was a wonder still. The partners found Mariano in a large locker, apparently mending the writing equipment stacked all around him. His black hair hung down over his face. He wore only one garment, frayed, linsey-woolsey trousers. Rubbing at something held across his knee with a smooth stone, he looked anything but the proud Indian fighter. "Polish and harness," whispered Johnson to Dell. The partners rode right up to the porch before Mariano raised his head. Only then, as Mariano stood up, did Johnson see what the foremost Indian killer of Colorado was working at. Mariano held up for their inspection a Ute scalp, a fresh Ute scalp. I mean, it makes me want to throw up. You know, the idea of holding someone's head, scalp, and skinning it and prepping it and doing all this stuff to it.
Eating their leg is one thing, but holding up a scalp.
I mean, I suppose, again, if it's my enemy, but gosh, this is just like... now, later storytellers, like those who wrote the reminiscences of Mariano in 1890, reported that Mariano and Captain Jack divided the West romantically between them. That on this certain occasion, Modeno was down in New Mexico simply to allow Jack to have northern Colorado to himself. But in fact, Jack, that pariah and traitor to his own tribe, had promised Mariano a death at the burning stake. Mariano had promised Jack the limb. So one was going to hang him and one was going to burn him.
Yeah.
And we're talking about Jack. Isn't Jack dead now?
Yeah, I believe so. If I recall.
Jack, what was his Arapaho Joe or something, or Hatchet Jack?
Yeah.
Hatchet Jack.
Hatchet Jack was his.
That's who it was.
Yep.
Already in their 100-odd battles, Mariano had killed most of Jack's original band. 50 scalps on 2 walls told the story. No, he's talking about the Indian. No, I don't know. I wish they would throw the whole name in.
Specification
Captain
there.
Jack. Look him up real quick so we can figure out which guy he was.
It's going to pull up Captain Jack Sparrow, I promise you.
Captain Jack Trapper.
Captain Jack Sparrow.
Mountain Man. Fired now by Johnson's and Dell's arrival, Mariano at once offered to take them on a hunt for Captain Jack. Yeah, he's like a Crow or Blackfoot Indian.
Yeah.
And they've been going at each other for years. Captain Jack is like a white Indian, I think.
Ellen Elliott Jack. Maybe that's him. Whoa, that's not what I wanted. Captain Jack Crawford, History Mountain Man. Looks like Buffalo Bill almost.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't want to go Pinterest.
Find him. Type in Crawford.
We're looking.
Okay. It says... he said Mariano at once offered to take him on a hunt for Captain Jack. 2 or 3 more outlaws recently joined with him, at least one for each of us. Dell, according to his own story, would have soon forgotten Indians for a time. So Dell doesn't want to go for fights and stuff. He just wants to trap.
So it says Kintpwash. I don't know how you'd say that, but it says son of a Modoc chief, was commonly known as Captain Jack because of his penchant for wearing a blue military jacket with brass buttons.
Yeah, Modoc.
Yep.
Son of a Modoc chief.
Yep.
Captain Jack, circa 1837 to 1873, was a major figure in the Modoc War, protesting unsuitable conditions on the Klamath Reservation. He led a band of about 50 warriors resisting forced removal by... Oh, I read that in a different book with Kit Carson. So he's with the Modoc. Yeah. Oregon, Willamette Valley, Tule. Oh no. Yeah. Lost River,
Jim
Clear
Crosby.
Lake. Okay. So yeah, He and Mariano Modeno, they're not about each other at all. You got he's kind of with the Indians. Captain Jack is an Indian.
Yes, so it says here, like, well-known mountain man and Indian fighter Ben Wright organized a vigilant group specifically to stalk and group specifically to stalk and kill Indians in an attempt to preserve the peace. 45 of the Modoc leaders were
set a trap.
Yeah.
Like that,
Yep.
So it says, let's get back to this. So, but Johnson, especially after a few nights' sleep on blankets spread on the floor, was anxious to get on the trail. There were, of course, beds enough in Mariano's house, but he himself preferred the porch. Johnson figured that a week's expedition should surely fetch in Jack's scalp. But for once, he underestimated a foe's cunning. In 3 separate ambuscades, ranging out 100 miles all over the northern Colorado country, Johnson did manage to kill and scalp 2 of Jack's braves. But the chief himself escaped. Finally, at the end of the summer, Mariano took the trail alone against his old enemy after securing his friend's promise that they would remain till he returned. The days passed and the weeks, and Mariano did not return. Johnson wanted to take the trail northward by early fall, but he could not leave. Finally, one evening, after more than 3 weeks, Johnson told Dell that if one more day passed and Mariano had not returned, they must go after him. Maybe the Ute got him, suggested Dell. No red Indian ever lived could salt away that Spaniard, said Johnson. But he might have broke a leg. Dell kept his own counsel. The next day, they spent fishing, frying up the mess of trout they had caught, talking over the winter's trapping prospects with 3 wolfers up from Gunnison. The last of the days, Johnson figured they could wait for Mariano pass quietly till, just at sunset, the dogs belonging to one of the wolfers set up a clamor. Johnson seized his rifle and ran out along the trail with that day's residents of Mariano's fort. The early evening haze was gathering in the valley, but as they gazed down the deeply rutted immigrant road, they could make out an approaching horse and rider. "Is that Mariano?" the crow killer called, his rifle at full cock. "Is that you, Mariano?" "Yes, it is, Senor Liver-Eater," he replied. As he came closer, those who awaited him could see a chief's full regalia lying across the front of Mariano's saddle. He held high a dripping scalp. "This was Captain Jack," he said. Johnson and Delgue rode down the valley of the Big Thompson next morning as the sun rose over the rim of the peaks. The pack horse Mariano had given them loaded down with supplies he had thrown in. Johnson spoke with both of them and thought, "Mariano's told us he took the scalp 4 days, but it was fresh. Didn't look more than an hour old," Dell agreed. Johnson drew rein, as did his partner then, and dismounted. He pointed at a mass of early fall leaves in their path. As Dell bent, he saw that the leaves were spattered with blood. "Reckon Mariano killed him here?" "Jack ain't dead yet," Johnson said. "Look over your head, lad." Dell crooked his neck. Jeez. The gaunt outlines of a giant cottonwood towered there. The cold breeze hissed among the dry leaves remaining on its branches. Far overhead, a limb, bent slightly at its outer end, held the swinging body of an Indian, tied hand and foot with rawhide. He had not been hanged by the neck, but on plaited rope of rawhide passed beneath his arms and knotted at the back.
Jeez.
That he was still alive, the twitching of his body could attest. That he was still conscious, his gaze attested from black, hate-filled eyes. His lips uttered not a sound. Captain Jack, dying in agony, was still Captain Jack, the Ute chief.
Jeez.
So this is a different Captain Jack, because this is a Ute chief, and that was a Modoc chief.
Yeah.
How any scalp, you could put in Captain Jack, the Ute chief.
Yeah.
How any scalped human could have lived all night swinging in the cold wind was more than Delgue could understand. "I reckon I'll kill the critter," he said, throwing rifle to shoulder. But the crow killer savagely struck it down. "Do you think he'd have spared Mariano?" He looked up at once more at the Ute, then shouted, "How you feeling? Is it cold up there?" "That were old Milt Sublet's trick," Johnson told Dell as they rode on. "You lasso a high limb, snub your rope round a tree trunk, and let your horse pull it down. Then you just tie up your coon and turn it loose." Almost as a chivalry almost as shivery as watching you eat liver, Del told him.
Savagery. Like, I don't know if it's savagery, but...
Full regalia. Yeah, I mean, as the story is told, legends grow, you know.
Right.
But yeah, he strings him up under the armpits, gets him caught up in there, ties his hands behind his back, all that kind of stuff so he can't get away, but then just lets him hang there and slowly die. Scalps him.
Yeah.
I mean, there's some savagery, there's some bitterness, there's some anger, there's some hate in your heart to do that to another. There's no compassion there.
Yeah.
That's for sure. Man, it's funny how Del Gue is like, let's just shoot him and like, this isn't right.
Put him out of his misery.
And Johnson's like, no, he'd have done the same thing. So he deserves it. Like, whoa. They don't just want to see him die. They want to see him die in agony.
Yeah. Right. A slow, agonizing death.
All right. Captain V.T. McGillicuddy, reminiscing in the 1920s, told of liver-eating Johnson's part in the great events of the mid-70s. These were the years in which the government first closed the Black Hills, the Pahasapa of the Sioux, to settlers. Then threw them open once again, basically when they discovered gold. Mm-hmm. They're like, yeah, you can have the Black Hills.
Yeah.
Until they found gold, and then they just basically... There's different stories. One of them is that, which the federal government is, they don't give a crap.
Yeah.
Powers that be. If they had an agreement, they'd trample all over it. But I think it was more like miners and settlers were like, we're going in and you can't stop us. And there was no force to enforce it. And then you had the similar thing happen from the native side, where you had Native Americans who would make a treaty and say, yeah, this is all your land. But those chiefs couldn't make the rules for the rest of their people any more than...
Right, exactly.
They didn't have a right to say it. So, like, 1/3 of let's say, the Utes were going to be like, or the Sioux, the Lakota were going to be like, yeah, I don't care what this chief said. He's not over me, and I'm not giving you this land. It wasn't like they were all unified and in one body, and it spoke for all the people. And they couldn't stop their people from just doing what they wanted. In the same way, I mean, I think it was within probably the power of the government, maybe, but I don't think, at that time that they had much reach in the Black Hills. But yeah, this is what happens. They make a peace treaty, so to speak, and they say, yeah, you can keep the Black Hills, and it's sacred ground for the Lakota. And then they find gold there in the Dakotas, and they just the settlers just roll in and just pillage the land.
Just take it over.
It's not long before the entire forest is denuded. There's not a tree left. The buffalo are gone, and everything's wiped out. Yep. And which is the story of European westward expansion, sadly.
Exactly.
And thanks to, one thing that I want to bring up here is it's true that as people moved west, even Daniel Boone and others early on, 100 years prior to this, 150 years, they moved on and they wiped out. Wherever white men were, the landscape became domesticated and the wild animals disappeared.
Yeah. Yep.
Wherever the Indians were, there was wildlife.
Plentiful wildlife.
To the point where, like, some animals became extinct, like the passenger pigeon and others that never could imagine that they could become extinct. There was just so many. But yet it happens. These different critters become extinct. And you see antelope, buffalo. Buffalo, I think at one point there was like 14 buffalo left.
Yeah, very few.
Although there is legend that there were buffalo up in Canada that we didn't really know about in some forested areas that were still around. But regardless, I mean, it's quite possible that the buffalo population was on the brink of extinction. I mean, not possible. It was.
It was.
I mean, when you think about the few that were there, all it takes is one brucellosis breakout, and all of them are dead.
Yeah. Yep.
Somehow, you look at the statistics of ducks, geese, antelope.
Well, look at
elk.
the elk, the white-tailed deer. I mean, the white-tailed deer was like
I think they said it got it down to 200,000 or 250,000 white-tailed deer or something.
So many white-tailed.
I mean, unbelievable. And then you look at today, and there's massively restored populations.
Yeah.
And one thing I want to cite is, although that these people were the ones who decimated the landscape, it was also those people in the form of Theodore Roosevelt and John Muir and others who reversed that and brought it back.
Correct.
And created a system where we could habitate together.
Yes.
So much of that, though, is dependent on the wealth of a nation. And I say this all the time. You know, the fight for wildlife, for a healthy climate, environmental causes, those are luxury endeavors.
Absolutely.
When you're not starving to death.
Exactly.
You can't look at places in Africa and sit here and go, well, we just need to stop everybody from these people are killing to eat.
Yes.
They're killing to make a dollar bill so they can get some basic medicines and water purification items so they can
there's
survive.
So much more that goes into the conservation. You know, you take Africa, for example, there's so much more that goes into that conservation for the people of Africa and those tribes and stuff than just the hunting side of it.
The reality is you don't want to put the cart before the horse.
Yeah.
Saving the environment before you can enrich the people is it won't work.
No.
It's a doomed venture. And so it bothers me when I see these pretentious people wanting to preach about conservation, especially in third world countries like Africa, but they don't want to put forth the effort to actually make the people in Africa self-sustaining.
Right.
They'll put all this money into saving a lion. They don't give two craps about the actual people on the ground who don't want that lion in their presence.
Yep.
And again, wealth leads to more and more environmental wellness. Look across the board. The most environmentally, the conscious nations are those with the most wealth.
Yes.
And so things like preserving and restoring elk habitats like the RMEF does, or the Mule Deer Foundation with mule deer, buffalo coming back, restoring those wolves and all of that, those things are only possible in a nation where we're wealthy,
where the funds are
and it's an endeavor we can work on and get better at. So people who are short-sighted and want to save the environment without bringing up the wealth level of every human being in the nation is moving in an authoritarian direction, for one, but it's a doomed venture as well. If you really want to help the whole planet, everyone, the wealthier everyone gets, the better off the planet becomes.
Right, correct.
And it's a shame that too many people don't quite understand how that works. But here we are back to the book, and it looks like the settlers are going in for the gold rush. And those were the years when the Lakota turned from the killing of individual gold hunters to such exploits against the United States Army as those of Crazy Horse and Sitting Bull.
Yep.
And when for one delirious summer and fall victory seemed theirs. Apparently, Johnson scouted in the hills in 1874. He served as guide for Captain McGillicuddy the next year in that topographical reconnaissance, which so alarmed and enraged the Sioux, McGillicuddy credited him with saving the whole army from annihilation on more than one occasion. McGillicuddy apparently never specified just what adventures Johnson went through with his army engineers, or what might or sagacity he was called upon to exhibit. Nor, tantalizingly enough, is there any story on the record from his assignment in 1876 in charge of the band of Crow Scouts who kept surveillance on the Lakota for General Nelson. Nelson Miles. The one-time Crow killer and his Crow companions in arms, one itches to know details of their working as a team, or even of their talk by the campfires, or even their sleeping arrangements. But typically enough, the stories of Johnson and the Crows, which have survived from the late 1870s, concern his individual prowess in hand-to-hand encounter and a special revenge upon the Sioux he undertook for them, quite as if no United States Army existed within 1,000 miles. And typically, the story handed down from the middle of 1870s concerns Johnson's travel with not the whole band of Crow allies, but with one pagan princess. Pagan. It's not pagan, it's pagan princess. White-Eye, whose story this is, was himself in the hills in 1876 with a party from Fort Laramie, which included Wild Bill Hickok, Colorado Charlie Utter, Calamity Jane, fresh from the Laramie jail, and some dance hall girls. But Johnson's adventure for 1876, as described by White-Eye, seems staged against a wilderness still utterly remote from jails and dance halls. And Johnson himself, at 53, is still portrayed as a young man, young enough indeed to start Delgue jumping to conclusions about the liver eater and his 20-year-old princess. Look, Ryan's almost 49, or he's 49 now.
I know you guys are old.
I think he just turned 49. They're saying that he is 53. Cameron Haynes is, 54?
Yeah, gotta be some 54, 50.
I mean, it's not outside the realm of possibility that the man's a badass still, and you better watch yourself. You know what I mean? Like, this ain't old.
No.
It's not old, especially if you've grown up exercising your whole life and eating
liver. That's all we need to do, people, is just eat liver.
It says, so this 20-year-old princess, she looked anything but a princess when Johnson first found her, starved and wizened on the headwaters of the Rosebud Creek. Her little brush lean-to of broken sticks and twigs was clearly made with her bare hands, for she had been set out on the prairie with no knife. Her skin, clothing, and tatters showed that she had been alone now, exposed to the elements for weeks. Johnson found her with a crude reed snare, catching what minnows she could in the creek. She would clearly not survive long on her recent diet. Johnson had little enough respect for any pagan, poor relations of the Blackfeet, and he thought them. This wrinkled, haggard woman looked to be 70.
Whew.
But she's 20. She knew Johnson, though. He was still exactly the figure familiar these 30 years in mountain man country. There was not, according to White-Eye, one gray hair on his red beard or on his head so miraculously never touched by a scalping knife. His buckskin suit was still filled out, and no more by his 260 pounds with no ounce of fat. He's a huge man.
Jeez.
He's a huge man. His weapons, aside from the famous Bowie he had carried through the Civil War, had changed over the years, to be sure, yet the new seemed already legendary. The Colt Walker, with the matching rosewood handle he had given to White Badger, the Crow chief who buried Crazy Woman, and received in return White Badger's stone tomahawk, a tribal antique, its handle richly encased in leather, sewn to so delicately that the stitches could hardly be seen and ornamented as only Crow technique would allow. This ancient weapon, men knew, Johnson had already wetted with blood of Sioux, Cheyenne, and Blackfoot. In more direct replacement of the Colt Walker, he carried a .45 Colt Army with swiveled stock lanyard. He still carried the improved Spencer repeater, replacement for his famous Hawken. The Army needle gun, he said after testing it extensively, could fetch a red Indian as far as I can smell one. To his horse, to a black stallion, hand-picked from the herds of his new friends, the Crows.
He loves those black ponies.
He's like the Grim Reaper.
Yeah.
To his horse, a black stallion hand-picked from the herds of the Crows, Johnson attributed some of his own instinct for sensing the presence of a foe. He sat it in the beautiful saddle of Anton Sepulveda, who was the knife thrower, right?
Yep, I believe so.
Who was shot in the chest at the Nez Perce ambush.
Yep.
The horse shied and whinnied when Johnson first came upon the Piegan. Johnson talked with her in sign language, no more than enough to gather what he had guessed anyway, that it was Cheyennes who had set her out on the prairie. He gave her food, then shifted the packs on his lead horse, placing some on his own mount behind his saddle. She was anxious enough to ride. She took for granted that she should ride the pack horse and stayed ahead of Johnson where he could watch her till he proved she could be trusted. Johnson observed soon that she rode well and that despite her recent privations, her stamina was extraordinary. Her further qualifications he would observe. He just admired her probably because she was surviving.
Yeah, well, and like I was looking here, it says the Piegan Blackfoot woman named Dawn Mist, and it has like a picture of I don't know if it's the same one or not, but this is like in 1912 or 1915 in Glacier National Park.
That's a totally different person.
Yeah, I think so. I was trying to
she
look
was
it up.
From the Cheyenne tribe.
I don't see.
From the Cheyenne. And the dates are totally off.
Yeah.
That's just a picture of a Piegan Blackfoot.
Yeah.
So they're distant relations of the Cheyenne and the Blackfeet then? Because it says in here they're a distant relation of the Cheyenne.
I have no idea.
Which are allies to the Lakota.
Yeah.
It says that they rode along the Rosebud where earlier that summer Crazy Horse and his warriors had whipped General George Crook. When the trail came to a ford and the Piegan stopped her mount, Johnson waved her on across. That night they camped some 35 miles from where the Rosebud enters the Yellowstone. Johnson would let no fire be struck this night, for the country was alive with Indian sign. Since the Custer Massacre had awakened the Indians to a sense of their might, the great mass of Sioux and Cheyenne, numbering many thousands, were dancing under the moon to the greater glory of Crazy Horse, while Sitting Bull in Canada was recruiting more followers. Johnson took jerk beef from his saddlebags along with a little pemmican and divided the small meal with the Piegan. Then he motioned for her to take his blankets. For himself in Sioux country, and with this unknown woman in his camp, there could be no sleep this night. He sat with his back against a boulder, gun in hand, watching the trail until daylight. Catching no more of a catnap than a few moments dozing, he felt safe. The dude just said, I'm going to stay awake.
Yeah.
Because there's too many Indians in the area, and I don't trust her. Finally, when darkness and its special dangers had passed, he ordered the squaw to gather twigs. What little smoke rose from these would not be seen far. She made a small fire, and Johnson cooked coffee. Now the Piegan asked for and received Johnson's bowie knife. Stepping into a thicket, she cut and trimmed a heavy sapling till it formed a serviceable club. She was, after all, but arming herself for a country of constant hazards. Johnson reached into his saddlebags, drew out the famous throwing knife of Anton Sepulveda, and offered it to her. She took the beautiful blade from its scabbard, then looked at Johnson in some astonishment. Seeing that his purpose was clear, she threw her club aside, fastened big Anton's scabbard about her waist, slid the weapon back into it, and mounted. The liver-eater reminded himself that he must now stay doubly on the alert. Yet, as he studied her tattered back, always enough, he insisted, for him to tell what an Injun was up to. He decided that if she could hold up, the Piegan might make a first-rate traveling companion. He was behind in his mending and tired of cooking.
Needs a little, a.k.a. housewife. No.
Johnson was never to take undue credit. Never one to take undue credit, as 33 years before he had rejected Old Hatcher's credit for strategy against the bear that he stabbed. So in his story of what happened at once the first morning with the Piegan, he claimed no credit for saving his own life. The trail turned from the creek bank out over rocks and through thick brush, simply in order to keep the Piegan in sight. He struck his horse a sharp slap, then precisely as the horse leaped ahead, an arrow grazed behind him. The frightened horse plunged and threw Johnson to the hard-packed earth. He heard the sound of its hooves pounding away, mingled with a war-whoop. Breath knocked out of his body, he saw through the dust rising around him a young Blackfoot brave. Then a tattered buckskin skirt flashed through the dust. Johnson saw Big Anton's bright long blade once again in a downward stroke. The young Blackfoot coughed and fell grunting across Johnson's still-stunned body. It occurred to Johnson, even as, at last, he stirred himself to leave the Blackfoot's body aside, to heave it aside, that he no longer need stand watch against his Piegan. Knife in hand, he sprang erect now, but it was the Piegan who again and again sank her blade into the Blackfoot's chest.
Jeez.
For the first time in his life, Johnson was sure that he could not have saved his own life, that another had saved it for him. He felt some embarrassment, but was not sure why, whether that he had needed help or that he had mistrusted the Piegan. He picked up his rifle and turned away to blow dust from the breech, but there was another surprise in store for him. "Him lone brave," said the Piegan in English. "No more come. Horse in timber." "I didn't know you could talk white, girl," Johnson said now in real astonishment, and one cannot but reflect that a woman who spoke only matters of such import was to his own heart. She wiped the bloody blade in a patch of moss, then handed it to Johnson and pointed at the dead Blackfoot's scalp, but the liver-eater handed it back to her and drew his bowie. I don't like a toothpick for a knife, toothpick for this job," he said, and he scalped the Indian. They recovered Johnson's horse and the Blackfoot's as well, and the Piegan took the dead warrior's buckskin jacket as well for her own use, along with his knife in his belt, and they were mounted and on their way. He is asleep now, and he trusted the Piegan at this point. So even as the sun dropped below the wide Montana horizon, Johnson and his companion pulled off the trail. He fell right to sleep with no effort. He did, though, wake for a moment when the Piegan stamped out the embers of a dying fire. He saw how she took the remaining blanket, propped it against the saddles, and leaned back. He observed appreciatively how the army needle gun across her lap. She kept the heavy revolver also ready to hand. Her eyes gleamed against the starlight. She watched the trail unblinking. She was in the same position when the galaxies paled and gave way to the chill Montana dawn.
She's prepared.
She's a dangerous one. Johnson and Waving Grass stayed together through one winter's scouting and another trapping. In the Belt Mountains below Fort Benton, she did her share of the work, he reported. She made an excellent trapping partner in a time when, with so few animals, the two men could not have worked together with any fair certainty of any profit. Evenings together, even two who spoke so little must come to know one another's stories. Johnson's curiosity did, after all, force him to remark on her knowing English. She had learned while still almost a baby, she said, from a woman her father captured from a burned immigrant train. For Waving Grass was the daughter of a chief. The immigrant woman had remained by rights in his lodge until her death. Waving Grass's own history was no less violent. She was under 10 when the Sioux made one of their periodic raids on her people, camped on the Belle Fourche River, and carried her away. The band which captured her under Little Crow put more than 800 settlers and soldiers to horrible deaths in Minnesota that same summer, and the little girl watched, fascinated, the scalp dance which followed. At 14, she was given to Black Bear, a Sioux warrior. But within the year, a northern Cheyenne screeching cat took Black Bear's scalp and Black Bear's woman. Among the Cheyennes, Waving Grass would encounter troubles more desperate yet. For though by Cheyenne tradition, Screeching Cat should have taken the girl into his lodge merely as his wife's slave, instead he took her as his second wife, favored wife. The first wife drove a long, thin blade into the heart of her husband in punishment, and she was burned at the stake. For her part in the triangle, Waving Grass had been put on the prairie where Johnson found her.
Jeez. Hell of a life. Passed around.
Dude, she's like, if you're going to put some other woman before me, knife to the heart, and then they burned her at the stake and put this little devil out on the prairie who got blamed. Okay. She might conceivably have stayed with Johnson for more winters than 2 had she not been so markedly young and a woman. Perhaps Delgue moved Johnson to sending her off by his mild enough remark that Johnson was furnishing her with bed and board. Johnson replied, "Board, but not bed, old coon," so decisively that Dell dropped the subject. But when after a fair winter of trapping they came out of the mountains and sold their fur at the trading post in Yellowstone, Johnson bade her goodbye. Or perhaps Waving Grass herself wanted more than a trapping partnership, as indeed she was to later suggest. If so, she had timed her move wrong. The army had set up a compound at Knife River for the widows and orphans of braves, where they might somehow shift till they could be sorted out. Johnson divided his winter's proceeds equally with his Piegan, packed her bulging supplies on 2 horses, bought her a new rifle and revolver to protect such wealth, and sent her riding to the compound. She went to Knife River proudly as Johnson's squaw, though she can hardly have expected to be welcomed as such by the widows of Blackfeet or Sioux. And the story is told of how Jacob Homer met her there. A group of soldiers walked over to the Indian camp, seeing several squaws seated on the ground. One of the cavalrymen remarked to Homer, "How would you like to have a squaw?" To their astonishment, one of the squaws turned and with flashing eyes berated them soundly in good English. She told them Homer said that she was the wife of Liver-Eating Johnson. So,
the tales that are untold.
Oh, dude, we got a bit left here, dude. We're gonna have to move into the next week, dude, because there's a little too much here to cover before we run out of time. We could go through this one last bit, so let's just do that, and then we'll get into the real ending. So we're not there, folks.
Not there.
We're just not quite. We're close, but we're not there. In fact, we're just going to end it right here because we got basically one more episode to go.
Yep.
So anyway, this is pretty crazy. We're getting toward the end here. It's interesting how he finds this woman, and we're going to get more into this woman just a little bit in the next chapter. So anyway, hope you're enjoying the book. Don't forget to check out Go Hunt Maps. We've talked about it before. They have an excellent map, and if you use the code GRITTY, it helps us out.
Correct.
But it also helps you out because you can get the map. Normally it's $50, but you get it for $30 because you'll get an in-store credit to the gear shop. When you use the code GRITTY, you'll get a $20 in-store credit. So in essence, you'll pay $30 for it. And if you use the code GRITTY at the gear shop, you get 20% off everything, and that's just all the time. Not 20% off. What's the discount code at the gear shop? You get a discount. I don't remember what it is. 10%?
Maybe 10%? I'm not sure.
Use code GRITTY at Go Hunt Gear Shop.
They may change it too, on and off.
Yeah. So. But either way, you save. And so if you're going to buy some stuff, some hunting gear, some supplies, backpacking equipment that we use, go get it at Go Hunt if you can, because that really does help a hunting company. It also helps us. And you're going to buy it anyway. Don't buy it at REI.
No.
Don't buy it there. Don't even buy it at Cabela's or Sportsman's.
I just snagged another cook stove because I need a backup, just in case.
Yeah. Which I recommend the Minimo.
Yes, I bought another one.
Did you?
I did. I got a second one.
SteriPen.
I need to get a SteriPen.
Mini rechargeable UV one.
I'm still on the battery train.
Dude, that thing is that's like carrying around a lead brick.
I know. It's the only thing I have in my pack that takes a battery.
We've talked about the maps before. They're an excellent value, and I just think that the satellite imagery surpasses everything else that's out there. It's incredible. Once you start using the satellite imagery, you'll have a hard time living without it. It's not as snappy as some of the other apps. That's getting improved by the day, but using the imagery is kind of indispensable. We were able to leverage so much information using that high quality satellite imagery. Yeah. And then also, I didn't end up hunting the exact area that I had downloaded with the other one because it's 5 miles wide, 10 miles wide, 150 miles wide, and I ended up hunting somewhere else. I didn't have service, but my Go Hunt map was full detail where my other maps were limited in size, and I ended up having a super low res map for my hunt, and I don't have to worry about
150 miles, not very detailed. Nope. I'll tell you that.
And you can do 10 times the amount of download. You can a whole quarter of a state with the Go Hunt,
like a whole unit at one click,
all the layers all at once with one touch of a button. You get it all. So check it out. Use the code GRITTY over there. It really helps us out. And thank you for tuning in. Tune in next week for the final. I can
we
say
are confident that is the
final episode of this saga, and I hope you've enjoyed it so far. Thanks for tuning in, and stay gritty.